The morning sun filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Matthew's Episcopal Church, casting colorful shadows across the wooden pews where I sat every Sunday for the past 8 years. My hands trembled as I gripped the edge of the pew, watching my husband Robert lead the congregation in prayer from his position as head deacon. His voice carried that familiar authority that once made me feel safe, protected. Now it made my stomach turn. 3 rows ahead, Catherine sat with her head bowed, her auburn hair catching the light. She looked serene, peaceful even, her hands folded over her still flat stomach. Nobody else knew yet. Nobody except me, and the secret was eating me alive from the inside out. "Let us pray for the families in our congregation," Robert's voice boomed across the sanctuary, "for their health, their prosperity, and their faithfulness to one another." I closed my eyes, but instead of praying, I remembered the afternoon 2 weeks ago when I came home early from my book club. The afternoon that shattered my world into a million pieces. I had been looking forward to surprising Robert with his favorite lasagna. The recipe had been in my family for generations, and I wanted to make something special since he'd been working late so many nights at the law firm. The house was supposed to be empty. Robert always worked late on Thursdays, and our teenage daughter Melissa was at soccer practice. But Robert's car was in the driveway. I remember thinking maybe he was sick, maybe he'd come home early feeling unwell. I grabbed the grocery bags from the back seat and fumbled with my keys at the front door, already planning how I'd take care of him, make him some soup, tuck him into bed. The house was quiet when I stepped inside. Too quiet. I called out, "Robert? Honey, are you okay?" but got no response. I set the groceries on the kitchen counter and walked toward our bedroom, my heart starting to race for reasons I couldn't yet understand. The bedroom door was partially closed, which was unusual for the middle of the afternoon. I pushed it open gently, expecting to find Robert asleep under the covers. Instead, I found my husband of 19 years tangled in our sheets with Catherine Morrison, the woman who baked cookies for every church function and always volunteered to help with the annual charity drive. Catherine, who had been our friend for 5 years. Catherine, whose husband Thomas worked overseas in the military and trusted our family to look after his wife while he served our country. They didn't see me at first. I stood frozen in the doorway, watching this intimate scene that belonged in someone else's life, not mine. Robert's hand was stroking Catherine's hair, and she was whispering something in his ear that made him laugh, a deep, genuine laugh I hadn't heard him make in months. I must have made a sound, because suddenly they both turned toward the door. Robert's face went white, and Catherine pulled the sheet up to cover herself, her eyes wide with terror and shame. "Elizabeth," Robert stammered, sitting up quickly. "I can explain," but I couldn't listen. I couldn't process words or explanations or excuses. I just turned and ran, grabbing my car keys from the kitchen counter and driving aimlessly around our small Texas town until the sun set and I had no choice but to go home. That night, Robert tried to talk to me. He followed me from room to room, his voice desperate and pleading. "It just happened, Liz. It wasn't supposed to mean anything. Catherine was lonely with Thomas deployed, and I was just trying to be a good friend, and things got complicated. I locked myself in the guest bathroom and cried until there were no tears left. When I finally came out, Robert was asleep on the couch downstairs. I lay awake in our bed, staring at the ceiling and smelling her perfume on my husband's pillow. Now, sitting in church 2 weeks later, I watched Catherine's profile as she participated in the responsive reading. Her voice was clear and confident. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." How could she sit here, in God's house, pretending everything was normal? How could Robert stand at the altar, leading prayers about faithfulness and family values, when he had shattered our family's foundation? The service ended, and as people began filing out, Catherine caught my eye and smiled that same warm, friendly smile she'd always given me. But now I could see something else behind it. Guilt, maybe. Or pity. "Elizabeth," she said, walking over to my pew. "How are you doing? You look tired." I forced a smile. Just busy with work and Melissa's activities. You know how it is. I do, she said, her hand unconsciously moving to her stomach. Listen, I was wondering if we could have coffee sometime this week. I have something I'd like to talk to you about. My blood ran cold. What about? Catherine glanced around the emptying church, then leaned closer. It's personal, family-related. Maybe Thursday afternoon. That coffee shop on Main Street. I nodded, not trusting my voice. After she walked away, I sat alone in the pew, the weight of her words pressing down on me like a physical force. Family-related. My hand started shaking again as the horrible possibility began to form in my mind. Robert appeared at my side. Ready to go, honey? Melissa's waiting in the car. I looked up at my husband, this man I'd loved since college, who had given me beautiful daughter and 19 years of what I thought was a happy marriage. His face looked older somehow, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there a month ago. Robert, I said quietly, we need to talk tonight. After Melissa goes to bed. Something flickered across his face, fear, recognition, resignation. He nodded. Okay. As we walked to the car together, I caught sight of Catherine getting into her sedan across the parking lot. She waved at us with that same friendly smile, and I waved back automatically. But inside, my heart was breaking all over again, because I was starting to understand that this betrayal might be even worse than I'd initially thought. The church bells chimed noon as we drove home. The familiar melody, now sounding ominous instead of comforting. I had a feeling those bells might never sound the same to me again. Thursday afternoon arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly. I sat in Brewster's coffee house on Main Street, nursing my second cup of coffee and watching raindrops race down the window. Catherine was 15 minutes late, and I was beginning to hope she wouldn't show up at all. But then I saw her red umbrella through the glass door and my stomach clenched. She entered looking flustered, shaking droplets from her coat and scanning the room until she spotted me in the corner booth. Elizabeth, I'm so sorry I'm late, she said, sliding into the seat across from me. The rain is just terrible today. It's fine, I replied, though my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. Catherine ordered a decaf coffee decaf, I noted with growing dread, and we sat in awkward silence until the waitress brought it over. The coffee shop was nearly empty due to the weather. Just an elderly man reading a newspaper by the window and a college student typing on her laptop. So, Catherine said, wrapping her hands around her mug, how have you been? Really? The question hung in the air between us. I studied her face, looking for signs of the guilt I was certain she must be feeling. Her eyes were slightly red-rimmed, as if she hadn't been sleeping well. Join the club, I thought bitterly. I've been better, I said honestly. Catherine, what did you want to talk to me about? She took a deep breath, and I saw her hands tremble slightly. Elizabeth, there's something I need to tell you. Something that's going to hurt you, and I'm so sorry for that. Here it comes, I thought. My heart started racing, but I tried to keep my expression neutral. I'm listening. Catherine stared down into her coffee for a long moment. When she looked up, there were tears in her eyes. I'm pregnant. Even though I had suspected it, hearing the words out loud felt like a punch to the gut. I gripped my coffee cup tighter, using the physical sensation to anchor myself. Congratulations, I managed to say. Thomas must be thrilled. Catherine's face crumpled, and she shook her head. Thomas has been deployed for 4 months. He won't be back for another 6 weeks. The mathematics of the situation hung between us like a toxic cloud. I felt nauseous, dizzy, as if the coffee shop was spinning around me. How far along are you? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. About 6 weeks, she whispered. 6 weeks, which meant she got pregnant around the time I found them in my bedroom, maybe even that very day. Catherine, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, whose baby is it? She started crying then, soft sobs that shook her shoulders. Several patrons looked over at our table with concern, and I felt exposed, vulnerable, as if our personal tragedy was being broadcast to the entire town. "I'm so sorry, Elizabeth. I never meant for this to happen. I never meant for any of it to happen. Whose baby is it?" I repeated, though we both knew the answer. "It's Robert's," she said, the words falling between us like stones into still water. "Oh, God, Elizabeth, I'm so sorry. I know how this looks. I know how terrible this is. But please believe me when I say we never planned this. It just had happened." I sat there in stunned silence, watching my former friend, cry into her hands. The betrayal felt fresh all over again, but now it was magnified by this new reality. It wasn't just an affair anymore. It was a pregnancy, a baby, a permanent, living reminder of their betrayal. "Does Robert know?" I asked. Catherine nodded miserably. "I told him yesterday. He's not handling it well." I almost laughed at the understatement. Robert wasn't handling it well. How was I supposed to handle it? How was Melissa supposed to handle it when she found out her father had gotten another woman pregnant? "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I don't know," Catherine said. "I've been praying about it, but God feels so far away right now. Thomas will know the baby isn't his when he comes home and does the math. Our marriage will be over." "Your marriage," she trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. My marriage was already over, I realized. It had been over the moment I walked into that bedroom 2 weeks ago. This pregnancy just made it official. "Have you told anyone else?" I asked. "No," Catherine said quickly. "Just you and Robert. I don't know how to tell my parents or Thomas or—" She gestured helplessly. "The whole church is going to know eventually. Everyone's going to know what we did." The church, our tight-knit congregation where Robert served as head deacon and I taught Sunday school, where Catherine helped organize every charity event and bake sale. We were supposed to be the pillars of the community, the examples of Christian marriage and family values. "Elizabeth, please," Catherine said, reaching across the table as if to take my hand. I pulled mine away. "I know I have no right to ask this, but I'm begging you. Please don't hate me. I know what we did was wrong, but I'm scared and I don't know what to do, and you're the only person I can talk to about this." The irony was overwhelming. The woman who had slept with my husband was now asking me for emotional support. The woman carrying my husband's child wanted me to comfort her in her time of need. "I can't do this," I said, standing up abruptly. "I can't sit here and console you about the consequences of sleeping with my husband. Elizabeth, please." But I was already grabbing my purse and heading for the door. I could hear Catherine calling my name, but I didn't turn around. I walked out into the rain without my umbrella, letting the cold water soak through my hair and clothes. When I got home, Robert's car was in the driveway. He was sitting at the kitchen table with his head in his hands, still wearing his work clothes. He looked up when I walked in, dripping wet and shivering. "You talked to Catherine," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, unable to speak. "Liz, Don't," I said, holding up my hand. "Just don't. Not tonight." I went upstairs and took a long, hot shower, trying to wash away the feeling of betrayal and heartbreak. But no amount of soap and water could clean the stain of what I'd learned today. When I came downstairs in my robe, Robert was still sitting at the table. Melissa was doing homework in the living room, her music playing through earbuds, oblivious to the destruction of her family happening just rooms away. "We need to figure out what we're going to do," Robert said quietly. I poured myself a glass of wine, a large one, and sat down across from him. "What we're going to do? Robert, you got another woman pregnant. There's no we in this situation anymore. Liz, please. I know I made a terrible mistake, but we can work through this. We can go to counseling, we can." "She's having your baby," I interrupted. "Your child, Robert. How exactly do we work through that?" Robert put his head back in his hands. "I don't know," he whispered. "God help me, I don't know." Outside, the rain continued to fall, and I realized that tomorrow I would have to wake up and pretend everything was normal. I would have to teach Sunday school and smile at church members and act like my world hadn't just imploded. But first, I had to figure out how to tell my teenage daughter that her father had shattered our family beyond repair. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of sleepless nights and forced normalcy. I went through the motions of daily life, cooking breakfast, going to work at the elementary school where I taught 3rd grade, helping Melissa with homework, but inside, I felt like I was drowning. Robert tried to talk to me several times, but I couldn't bear to have those conversations yet. Every time I looked at him, I saw Catherine's face, heard her voice saying it's Robert's baby. The wound was too fresh, too raw. Catherine had stopped coming to church, which was both a relief and a source of gossip among the congregation. "I hope she's not sick," Mrs. Patterson mentioned after service one Sunday. "She looked a little pale the last time I saw her." If only you knew, I thought grimly. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in October. I was grading papers at the kitchen table when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my lawyer's office, Patricia Wells, who had handled our wills and property documents over the years. "Elizabeth," Patricia's voice sounded strained. "I'm sorry to call so late, but I need to speak with you about something urgent. Can you come to my office tomorrow afternoon?" "Is everything okay?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I knew what this was about. "It's complicated," Patricia said. "Just can you be here at 3 o'clock? And Elizabeth, don't bring Robert." That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about Patricia's tone, the way she'd emphasized not bringing Robert. Whatever she needed to tell me was going to be bad. I could feel it in my bones. The next afternoon, I sat in Patricia's office, surrounded by law books and diplomas, waiting for whatever bomb was about to drop on my already shattered life. Patricia was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a reputation for being both thorough and discreet, qualities that had made her popular with many families in our town. "Elizabeth," she began, settling behind her desk with a thick folder in front of her. "What I'm about to tell you needs to stay between us for now. Robert came to see me last week." My heart started racing. "About what?" "He wants to transfer some assets," Patricia said carefully. "Specifically, he wants to set up a trust fund. For a child." The room started spinning. "What kind of child?" Patricia looked at me with sympathy. "Elizabeth, I think you know what kind of child. He told me about the situation with Catherine Morrison." I gripped the arms of my chair. "He's setting up a trust fund for her baby?" "A substantial one," Patricia confirmed. "He wants to liquidate part of his retirement account and some investments. The trust would provide for the child's education, medical expenses, living costs." Without talking to me, my voice was getting higher, more shrill. "He's planning to support this child financially without even discussing it with his wife." Patricia nodded grimly. "That's not all, Elizabeth. He also asked me about divorce proceedings, specifically about how to protect his assets and ensure he can still provide for this child even if you were to seek spousal support." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Not only had Robert gotten another woman pregnant, but he was now planning our divorce and trying to figure out how to minimize what I would receive so he could support his illegitimate child. "He's planning to divorce me?" I whispered. "He's exploring his options," Patricia said gently. "Elizabeth, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Do you want to fight for this marriage?" I stared at her, the question hanging in the air. Did I want to fight for a marriage to a man who had not only cheated on me, but gotten his mistress pregnant and was now secretly planning to support that child while divorcing me? "I don't know," I said honestly. "I don't know anything anymore." Patricia leaned forward. "Here's what I need you to understand. If Robert is planning to set up this trust and file for divorce, you need legal representation immediately. Not just any lawyer. You need someone who's going to fight for your rights and your daughter's future." "But you're Robert's lawyer too," I pointed out. "Not anymore," Patricia said firmly. As of today, I'm representing you. Robert will need to find new counsel, and frankly, that's going to be his problem, not mine. I felt a surge of gratitude toward this woman who was willing to take my side in what was sure to be a messy situation. There's something else, Patricia continued. I did some research into Catherine Morrison's situation. Her husband Thomas is due to return from deployment in 2 weeks. My stomach dropped. Does he know? As far as I can tell, no. But he's going to figure it out pretty quickly when he gets home to a pregnant wife who's been alone for 6 months. The implications were staggering. Thomas Morrison was a career military man with a spotless record and a reputation for being intensely protective of his family. When he discovered that his wife was pregnant with another man's child and that the other man was someone he'd trusted as a friend, there was no telling how he might react. Elizabeth, Patricia said, I need to be very direct with you. This situation is about to explode in ways you can't imagine. When Thomas gets home and learns the truth, it's going to become very public very quickly. The church community, your daughter's school, your workplace, everyone is going to know. I put my head in my hands, feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was coming. What do I do? I asked. First, you need to tell Melissa, Patricia said. She needs to hear this from you before she hears it from someone else. Second, you need to decide whether you want to try to save your marriage or whether you want me to start divorce proceedings immediately. The drive home was a blur. I kept thinking about Melissa, about how I was going to explain to my 17-year-old daughter that her father had had an affair and gotten another woman pregnant. How do you shatter a child's image of her father like that? When I got home, Robert was in his study, presumably working on case files. Melissa was in the living room watching TV. She looked so young, so innocent, with her long brown hair pulled back in a ponytail and her homework spread across the coffee table. Melissa, I said, can we talk? She looked up with a smile. Sure, Mom. What's up? I sat down on the couch next to her, trying to find the right words. How do you begin a conversation like this? Sweetheart, there's something I need to tell you about Dad and me. Something that's going to be very difficult to hear. The smile faded from her face. Are you guys getting divorced? The question hit me like a punch. How did you? I've seen how you two have been acting, Melissa said quietly. You barely talk to each other anymore. Dad's been sleeping on the couch. And you've been crying, Mom. I hear you at night. My heart broke for this girl who had been watching her parents' marriage disintegrate and trying to make sense of it on her own. Melissa, I said, reaching for her hand, your father made some choices that have hurt our family very badly. He had a relationship with another woman. Melissa's face went pale. He cheated on you? I nodded, the words feeling like glass in my throat. With Catherine Morrison from church. Mrs. Morrison. Melissa's voice was shocked, but she's married to Mr. Thomas, and they're our friends. I know, baby. It's very complicated and very painful. Melissa was quiet for a moment, processing. Then she asked the question I'd been dreading. Is that why you and Dad are going to get divorced? There's more, I said gently. Catherine is pregnant. The silence that followed was deafening. Melissa stared at me with wide eyes, her young face trying to comprehend the magnitude of what I'd just told her. She's having Dad's baby? Melissa whispered. I nodded, and that's when my daughter started to cry. Not the angry tears of a teenager having a tantrum, but the deep, heartbroken sobs of a child whose world had just collapsed. I held her as she cried, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I knew exactly what I had to do. Sunday morning arrived crisp and clear, the kind of October day that usually filled me with hope and energy. Instead, I felt like I was walking toward my own execution as we approached St. Matthew's for what I suspected would be our last service as the Patterson family. Melissa had decided she wanted to come to church despite everything, saying she needed to see everyone one more time before it all comes out. My brave daughter had spent the week processing the news about her father's affair and impending divorce with a maturity that both impressed and saddened me. No 17-year-old should have to deal with their family imploding. Robert walked beside us in silence. Since our conversation on Wednesday night, where I'd told him I knew about the trust fund and his plans to divorce me, we'd barely spoken. He'd moved permanently to the guest room, and I'd asked him to find somewhere else to stay after this weekend. As we entered the sanctuary, I noticed Catherine sitting in her usual pew, looking pale but composed. She was showing now just slightly, but enough that anyone who knew what to look for could see. Her husband, Thomas, sat beside her in his dress uniform, having returned from deployment 3 days ago. I'd heard through the church grapevine that his homecoming had been quiet, no big celebration, no family gathering. Now I understood why. The service began, as it always did, with opening hymns and responsive readings. I went through the motions, standing and sitting at the appropriate times, but my attention was focused on the drama I could sense building around us. Thomas Morrison looked like a man holding himself together through sheer force of will. His jaw was clenched, his posture rigid, and every few minutes he would glance at his wife with an expression I couldn't quite read. Catherine, meanwhile, kept her eyes downcast, her hands folded in her lap. During the pastoral prayer, I found myself actually praying for the first time in weeks, not for forgiveness or healing, but for strength to get through whatever was about to happen. After the scripture reading, Pastor Williams announced that there would be a brief recess before his sermon to handle some church business. This was unusual, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "If the deacons could please join me in the vestry," Pastor Williams said, along with Mr. and Mrs. Morrison and Mr. and Mrs. Patterson. My blood turned to ice. Beside me, Robert went white as a sheet. Several people in the congregation turned to look at us with curiosity, and I felt exposed, vulnerable. We followed Pastor Williams to the small room behind the altar, along with the other deacons and the Morrisons. Thomas Morrison looked like a man barely containing his rage, while Catherine appeared to be on the verge of collapse. "Please, everyone sit down," Pastor Williams said, though his own voice was strained. "Thomas, would you like to explain why you requested this meeting?" Thomas Morrison stood up slowly, his hands clenched at his sides. When he spoke, his voice was deadly quiet, but carried the authority of a military officer accustomed to command. 3 days ago, I came home from a 6-month deployment to discover that my wife is 3 months pregnant, he said. Since I've been overseas for 6 months, simple mathematics tells us that this child is not mine. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Catherine started crying softly, and I found myself feeling sorry for her despite everything. After considerable discussion, Thomas continued, my wife has confessed to having an affair with Robert Patterson. Several of the deacons gasped, and I heard one of them whisper, "Dear God." Robert sat frozen beside me, staring at his hands. "Furthermore," Thomas said, his voice getting harder, "I have discovered that Mr. Patterson has been making financial arrangements to support this child, including setting up a trust fund and consulting with lawyers about divorce proceedings." Pastor Williams looked stricken. "Robert, is this true?" Robert finally looked up, and I could see that he was crying. "Yes," he said simply. "It's true." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Deacon Miller, an elderly man who'd known our family for years, spoke up. "Robert, you're the head deacon of this church. You lead prayers about family values and Christian marriage every Sunday. How could you do this?" "I don't know," Robert said, his voice breaking. "I don't have an excuse. I betrayed my wife, my daughter, my church, and my God. I don't know how to make it right." Thomas Morrison stepped forward, and for a moment I thought he might hit Robert. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. "This is a copy of a legal complaint I'm filing tomorrow morning," he said. "I'm suing Robert Patterson for alienation of affection and criminal conversation. In Texas, a spouse can still seek damages when someone destroys their marriage. He threw the papers on the table in front of Robert. "Catherine and I are divorcing. She'll be raising your child alone, because I won't have anything to do with either of them. But before I wash my hands of the situation entirely, I want everyone in this room and this church to know exactly what kind of man Robert Patterson really is." Pastor Williams tried to regain control of the situation. "Thomas, I understand you're hurt and angry, but perhaps we should—" "No," Thomas interrupted. "I'm done being quiet about this. I trusted this man with my wife while I served our country, and he repaid that trust by having an affair and getting her pregnant. The whole congregation deserves to know what their head deacon has been doing." That's when Patricia Wells appeared in the doorway. I hadn't even known she was at church, but there she was in her professional attire, looking like she meant business. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, "but I represent Mrs. Elizabeth Patterson, and there are some legal matters that need to be addressed immediately." Robert looked confused. "Patricia, what are you doing here?" "I'm no longer your attorney, Robert," Patricia said coolly. "As of last week, I represent your wife, and I have some information that's relevant to this discussion." She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "It seems that Mr. Patterson has been quite busy making financial arrangements. Not just the trust fund for Catherine Morrison's child, but also liquidating joint assets and transferring money to accounts that his wife doesn't have access to." My heart stopped. "What?" "Your husband has been systematically moving money out of your joint accounts and investments," Patricia explained. "Approximately $80,000 so far, all transferred to a separate account he opened last month." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Not only had Robert cheated and gotten another woman pregnant, but he'd been stealing our money to support his new family. "Robert," I said, my voice shaking with rage, "you've been stealing from us?" "From Melissa's college fund." Robert looked stricken. "Liz, I was going to tell you." "When?" I shouted, no longer caring who heard me. "When were you going to tell me that you'd been stealing money to support your pregnant mistress?" The room erupted in chaos. Thomas Morrison started cursing. Pastor Williams was trying to calm everyone down, and the other deacons were talking over each other in shocked voices. But through all the noise, I heard something that made my blood run cold. The church bells had stopped ringing. For as long as I could remember, St. Matthew's bells chimed every hour during Sunday service. But now, in this moment of revelation and betrayal, they had fallen silent. Patricia Wells stepped into the center of the room, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "I'm sorry to interrupt this family meeting," she said, "but there's one more thing everyone needs to know." She looked directly at Catherine, who was sobbing in her chair. "Mrs. Morrison," Patricia said, "would you like to tell everyone, or should I?" Catherine looked up through her tears, confusion written across her face. "Tell them what?" Patricia's expression was grim. "About the other pregnancy." The room went dead silent. Even Thomas Morrison stopped mid-sentence and stared at the lawyer. "What other pregnancy?" Catherine whispered. Patricia opened her folder and pulled out a medical record. 2 years ago, you were treated at Dallas Methodist Hospital for a miscarriage. The father was listed as unknown on the medical forms, but the dates correspond exactly with another one of Robert's business trips. I felt like the floor was falling out from under me. 2 years ago? I repeated. "This isn't the first affair," Patricia said, looking at me with sympathy. "And based on the financial records, it won't be the last. Robert has been having multiple affairs for years and using family money to support various women and situations." Robert stood up abruptly, his chair falling backward. "That's enough," he said. "This is a private family matter." "No," I said, standing up as well. "This stopped being private the moment you decided to steal from our family and lie to our church." I looked around the room at all these people who had been part of our lives for years, fellow church members, friends, people who had trusted Robert as a leader and role model. "I want everyone to know," I said, my voice steady despite the tears running down my face. I want the whole congregation to know what Robert Patterson has done to our family." Thomas Morrison nodded grimly. "Then let's tell them." We walked back into the sanctuary together, the wronged spouses, the lawyer and Pastor Williams. The congregation was still seated, waiting for the service to continue, unaware that their world was about to be shattered just like mine had been. Pastor Williams approached the pulpit with heavy steps. "I'm afraid we have some difficult news to share with the congregation," he began. But before he could continue, Patricia Wells stepped forward. "With the permission of Mrs. Elizabeth Patterson and Mr. Thomas Morrison," she said in a voice that carried to every corner of the church, "I need to make an announcement that affects this entire community." The sanctuary was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. In the third row, I saw Mrs. Henderson lean forward with interest. In the back, the young families with small children stopped trying to keep their kids quiet. Patricia took a deep breath. "Catherine Morrison is pregnant with Robert Patterson's child." The gasp that went up from the congregation sounded like a collective intake of breath. People turned to look at each other, at us, at Catherine and Robert, trying to process what they'd just heard. "Furthermore," Patricia continued, "this affair has been ongoing for months, and Mr. Patterson has been using family funds to support Mrs. Morrison and prepare for this child, without the knowledge or consent of his wife." That's when the chaos began. People started talking all at once, some standing up, others leaning over pews to whisper to their neighbors. Children started asking their parents what was happening, and several elderly women looked like they might faint. But through it all, the church bells remained silent. I looked at Melissa, who was sitting in our usual pew, her face pale but composed. My brave daughter met my eyes and nodded, giving me the strength to do what I needed to do next. I walked to the front of the sanctuary and faced the congregation, these people who had been our extended family, who had celebrated holidays and birthdays and milestones with us for nearly a decade. "I know this is shocking," I said, my voice carrying despite my broken heart. It was shocking to me too. "But I want you all to know that Melissa and I will be okay. We have each other, we have our faith, and we have the support of good people like Patricia Wells who are helping us navigate this difficult time." I looked directly at Robert, who was standing near the altar looking broken and defeated. "What we don't have anymore," I said, "is the man we thought we knew, the man we trusted. The man who stood before this congregation every Sunday and led prayers about faithfulness and family values while he was systematically destroying his own family." The silence that followed was profound. Then, slowly, Mrs. Henderson stood up from her pew. She was followed by the Miller family, then the Johnsons, then more and more people, until nearly half the congregation was standing in solidarity. "Elizabeth," Mrs. Henderson called out, her voice strong despite her 78 years. "This church stands with you and Melissa." The show of support broke something loose inside me, and I started crying again, but this time they weren't tears of betrayal and heartbreak. They were tears of gratitude and relief. Robert walked toward the exit, his head down, unable to face the community he had served and betrayed. Catherine followed shortly after, her hand protectively over her stomach, tears streaming down her face. Thomas Morrison approached me as the congregation slowly began to file out, many stopping to offer words of support and condolences. "Elizabeth," he said quietly, "I want you to know that none of this was your fault. You're a good woman, and you deserved better than this." "So did you," I replied, and for a moment we stood together in shared understanding of betrayal and loss. As the last of the congregation left, I found myself alone in the sanctuary with Melissa and Patricia. The afternoon sun was streaming through the stained glass windows, casting the same colorful patterns across the empty pews that I'd watched for so many years. But everything was different now. The church bells were still silent, and I had a feeling they would remain that way for a long time. "Mom," Melissa said, taking my hand, "what happens now?" I looked at my daughter, this strong, beautiful young woman who had handled the destruction of her family with more grace than her father had shown and felt a surge of hope for the first time in months. "Now we start over," I said. "Just you and me." Patricia gathered her papers and closed her briefcase. "Elizabeth, I'll have the divorce papers ready by Wednesday. Given what happened today, I don't think Robert will contest anything. He knows he's lost more than just his marriage. He's lost his reputation, his position in the church, probably his job at the law firm when this gets out." As we walked toward the exit, I turned back one more time to look at the sanctuary where I'd worshipped for nearly a decade, where I'd thought I had a happy marriage and a stable family. The church bells chose that moment to resume their hourly chime, the familiar melody echoing through the empty space. But they sounded different now, not like the comforting call to worship they'd always been, but like a funeral dirge for the life I used to have. 6 months later, I would drive past St. Matthew's on my way to the new apartment Melissa and I shared across town. I would see Catherine getting out of her car, visibly pregnant now, walking slowly toward the church entrance. She'd stopped attending for several months after the scandal broke, but eventually returned, probably seeking the same forgiveness and community support we all needed. Robert never came back to St. Matthew's. He'd moved to Dallas, taken a job with a different law firm, and according to Melissa, was trying to make things right with everyone he'd hurt. The trust fund he'd set up for Catherine's baby remained in place, though Patricia had ensured that none of our family's money would go toward it. Thomas Morrison had gotten his divorce and been transferred to a base in California, wanting to start fresh somewhere far from the painful memories of Texas. Before he left, he'd stopped by to check on Melissa and me, bringing us a casserole his mother had made and telling us that we would always have his respect and friendship. But on that Sunday, when everything fell apart, as I walked out of the church with my daughter's hand in mine and my lawyer by my side, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. The truth was finally out. The lies were over. The pretending was finished. And for the first time in months, when I heard those church bells ring, they sounded like hope. 2 years later, I still drive past St. Matthew's sometimes, usually when I'm running errands on the other side of town. The church looks exactly the same stone facade, same stained glass windows, same bell tower that chimes every hour. But I'm different now. Melissa graduated as valedictorian and is thriving at the University of Texas on a full academic scholarship. She sees her father occasionally, stiff visits that gradually became more comfortable as time passed and wounds healed. She has a half-brother now, Catherine's son Michael, who looks disturbingly like Robert did as a baby. Melissa sends him birthday cards and Christmas presents, showing a maturity and forgiveness that continues to amaze me. I'm teaching at a different school now, 5th grade instead of 3rd, and I love the challenge of working with older kids who ask more complex questions about life and fairness and why bad things happen to good people. I've become something of an expert on those topics. The divorce was finalized 18 months ago. Patricia managed to recover most of the money Robert had hidden, plus enough additional assets to ensure that Melissa's college was fully funded and I could afford a comfortable life. Robert's law career never fully recovered from the scandal. It's hard to practice family law when your own family dissolution was the talk of 3 counties. I've been dating someone new for the past 6 months, a kind widower named James who teaches at the community college and has never asked me to set foot in a church. We take long walks, cook dinner together, and talk about books and travel, and all the simple pleasures I'd forgotten I enjoyed. Sometimes people ask me if I miss the community aspect of church, the feeling of belonging to something larger than myself. The truth is, I found a different kind of community in my fellow teachers, in my neighbors, in the book club I joined, in the women's support group that Patricia recommended. Last week, I ran into Mrs. Henderson at the grocery store. She's in her 80s now, moving a little slower but still sharp as ever. "Elizabeth," she said, giving me a warm hug, "you look wonderful." "Happy." "I am," I realized as I said it. "I really am." "Good," she said firmly. "You deserved happiness all along. Some of us just took too long to see what was right in front of us." As I drove home that day, I passed St. Matthew's just as the bells were chiming 6 o'clock. They sounded clear and beautiful in the evening air, calling people to Wednesday night service. I smiled and kept driving toward my own life, my own happiness, my own version of grace. The church bells still ring every hour, marking time and calling the faithful to worship. But I don't need them to tell me who I am anymore.